Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the National Parents Union for the Nightly Restorative Check-In. I am Dr. Enjolie LaFerrie, and we are here today on November 27th. I had to look down the date because time continues to mean very little in this time of COVID. But anyway, I am here in Arizona in this beautiful Sonoran desert on Otham land. This show is the brainchild of Marisol Queveda Rerucha, one of my comadres, one of my dear friends. The way that I conceive or interpret of her thought for the show is thinking about a check-in being for caregivers, for parents, for educators. And when I think about what I want to be doing on a Friday night, I want to relax, I want to chill, I want to eat good food. And I want to be able to just kind of have that really calm conversation without any worry about timeline that we have to go to bed early, where I can just really let go and share, right? And so that's kind of the spirit with which at least I put together the Friday shows. You can catch Marisol on Mondays and Wednesdays. But anyway, Marisol originally brought me onto the very first week of her shows, which was all the way back in March. And she brought me on because I am a psychologist and a hypnotherapist. And I introduced a breathing technique titled 4-7-8. And so both Marisol and I continue to maintain the integrity of that breathing technique, and we carry it over from show to show. So the way that the technique goes is you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then you release or exhale for 8 seconds. And you do that 4 times around. On the exhalation, that's maybe the only one that can feel a little weird if you're not used to it. You want to try to exhale for that full 8 seconds. So it's this mix of kind of holding your breath while you're releasing it. I love this. The way that I use this breathing technique in this pattern is as I'm kind of moving from appointment to appointment or next task to next task. If I need to get centered, if I need to arrive somewhere, it's also really effective. And Marisol uses it when she wakes up in the middle of the night to get back to sleep. I have done that before. Just generally, knock on wood, I'm a pretty decent sleeper. So I haven't had to use it that way. And if I have woken up in the middle of the night, sometimes I maybe don't think about using it. As always, I encourage you to maybe close your eyes or pick a focal point, and that's just so that you don't get distracted, because our visual sense is one of our largest senses, which also means that if something passes in front of it, we can get distracted. Okay. Sorry, I got to calm myself down, bring my energy down. All right, so I will count out the 4-7-8 for you. So go ahead and inhale and exhale as you normally would. And then on your next inhalation, inhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Return back to your normal breath. You guys, I kind of wanted to yawn and take a deep breath in the middle of my count, which actually happens pretty frequently. I hope you guys feel good. I know I have to own I'm coming in with a little bit of fatigue. But regardless of how tired I feel on Fridays, as soon as I get with you all, as soon as kind of like the camera is on and the show goes live, I find this energy because I just enjoy this work so much. So I've introduced myself professionally. I wear many hats, and I want to make sure that I introduce myself both personally, as far as my community affiliations go. So I'm originally from Southern California. My father is Afro-Cuban, or was Afro-Cuban, so we are Taino and Arawak. My mom's from Guatemala, so we're from Maya territory. If you were here from the beginning when I started the shows, you met my brother and my sister on those shows. I'm a mom to a now 21-year-old daughter. Crazy. And I'm also a widow. I've talked about that, talked about my walk with grief and loss on various shows. I'm a member of the Siwa Patli collective as well. You've seen many of my comadres and some of my elders here on this show. We are a group here in Arizona that focuses on Indigenous mothering, and we like to say that we focus on mothering and their mothers and their families from womb to tomb. So actually, as a part of some of the work that I do with the collective, I sought out the certificate to become a death midwife. And that's actually how I came to meet Reverend Angie Buchanan, who's going to be here on our show here in a second. I want to introduce her and kind of give you a little bit of background to know why I invited her on the show. That we're in unprecedented times. We're in difficult times where people are experiencing grief and loss in a multitude of ways. Some of us because we've actually lost someone due to the pandemic. Some of us just because we've lost someone just because regular daily loss is happening. And then there's lots of other smaller griefs that we're experiencing with not being able to engage family and friends and situations in life the way we normally would. So that was the spirit also with which and why I wanted to cover this topic here during the holidays. Angie, as I call her, but Reverend Buchanan, she developed and teaches a certified class in death midwifery. It's an intensive training that really focuses on compassionate end of life care. Also, there's an emphasis on ecologically sensitive funerals and burials, which all this stuff we can define here in a second. She's the senior minister of Earth Traditions, which is a pagan church, and she's an instructor for the ministry training program. Lastly, and she's the spiritual director for Gaia's Womb, a women's interfaith spirituality group. So let me welcome Reverend Angie Buchanan.
Hi. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I know that it's late, a little bit late for you, and it's been a busy week, but I just think that this is such an important topic for us to cover. So before you and I jump into like conversation, are there any other ways that you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, like you, I wear a lot of hats. I think you covered some of them. I'm also a spiritual advisor for students at the University of Chicago, and I'm a dog lover, and I have two children. Who my oldest son used to be 21, but now he's 41, and and I have a son who died in his first year, who would be 40 this year.
Yeah. Thank you for
a book.
And what's that?
And I'm writing a book.
Wow. Okay. We're going to definitely have to get to know, get more information about your book. Thank you for sharing, and just being vulnerable with us. And that's how I've known you to be. That's one of the things that I admire about you, just how present you are and how much you just share right from your heart, and you're doing it right now. So as always, right, this is a check-in. So I really want to know kind of, how are you? How is your world, and how are things going?
Well, that's a sort of an onion of a question. We can peel back layers and layers. But in general, I'm fine. And I feel very fortunate to be fine because, as you said, these are unprecedented times. And excuse me, first of all, I am immunocompromised. So traveling through a world of COVID has required some real adjustments and some real creativity. But for the most part, I have adjusted very well to being home, um, to getting little projects done around the house and actually getting them done
Mm-hmm.
and starting them and circling back around 2-3 weeks later to try to pick up the pieces and figure out where I am. I stay in touch with people on Zoom and on the phone and that sort of thing. And so it's sort of a cognitive dissonance. I'm fine, but I'm not fine.
Yeah. Like we're fine, but in a different way. And we're still, at least I'll say, I know I'm fine. It's different. And I'm trying to catch up and then trying to be okay with the fact that I'm not caught up, So it's this,
Yeah.
what uncertainty feels like, what change feels like. I think it's really unique, though, that so many of us are experiencing it all at the same time. I think that's different.
Mm-hmm.
If you're experiencing that, yeah.
And it's not, yeah, the experience is both the threat of having a disease and or the navigating people that we love that have it or could potentially get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's this, I agree with the term you used of a cognitive dissonance of like, it doesn't make sense, but also it's this constant negotiating of like, okay, I want to be careful, but I also want to live. And how do I do that? Right. So, we have Maritza's one of my colleagues here. She's saying, yeah, we're surviving through the current state of life. Some of us too, this stays with me. I had another guest on the show who also talked about work and that like we're living at work. And that's this new thing, that we're negotiating as well. Let's, I feel like the concept of death midwifery is something that is very unique to most people until I think they hear it and then they realize, oh, like my grandma did that. Oh, I did that for my, for my parent. Right. So I again, Angie, to me, you're one of my teachers. So can you give us a definition and explain that concept to the audience?
Sure. Well, I guess in the question posed, I would say, do you know what a birth midwife is? And most people do. So a birth midwife is someone that assists another human being to come into the world. And a death midwife assists a human being in leaving the world. And, when I say assists, I don't mean that we're standing on oxygen tubes or being grim reapers or anything like that, but we're present. And we're present in a holistic, non-medical, compassionate way that bridges the gap between the medical profession and the funeral industry. And there's a huge gap in there. And it is a gift to be able to do this because we live in a death-denying culture. It is one of the kindest things you can do for someone. I think there's a Buddhist saying that says that one of the biggest blessings in life is to give birth to another human being. And I would say the second gift would be to be there as an individual commits their last act of being human, because that's essentially what death is. It doesn't matter what your religious or spiritual beliefs are. When you exhale for that last time, whatever it is that was animating you leaves and you cease to be human. And that is just a really important rite of passage, and it deserves attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I love how you describe it. What are you noticing, if anything? What are you noticing with the fact that, again, regardless of culture or even religious practice, most people are used to having end of life be among loved ones, and that we're in this situation, pandemic, where people are dying alone. What are you noticing as it relates to the deaths, or probably more so as it relates to the survivors and the surviving family members?
Well, there are a couple of pieces there that I'd like to pull apart a little bit. First of all, we are only now sort of recognizing that people don't have to be alone when they die. It and it's become important to us, which is somewhat new, because it used to be that both the medical profession and the funeral industry, it was over medicalized and immediate, and so these things were professionalized, and we turned our loved ones over to them. And we're only now starting to sort of come full circle on that and say, wait a minute, I don't want my mom to be alone. I want to be with her, rather than, I don't really want to see this. This isn't how I want to remember her. And so as we move into COVID, what I'm finding is that more and more people are embracing that I want to be there with my mom. And it's not just if she's sick or dying. She's 80 years old and she's in lockdown in a nursing home, and I can't visit her. I can't see her. So what we're doing is dealing with people who are in that situation and doing the best that we can to use technology to bridge the gap with the sort of comfort that this isn't forever. This is a temporary thing. We'll move through it, but also understanding that even though it's not optimal, that electronics and technology are not optimal, it's what we have.
Yeah.
And it's better than it could have been if we didn't have that technology. So it's forced us to become much more creative. And it's forced us to be more supportive of one another in ways that we weren't being before. And it has also opened up an opportunity for people who wouldn't normally be able to be in touch with this person or visit them or travel across the country to do so.
One of the things that I've noticed is that I don't know, I feel that there's, at least in the immediate, a little bit more of a respect for the need for a stillness. So like if somebody's passed, there's this time and space for like, oh, hold on, like we get that. Everybody knows that right now somebody's going to potentially know someone who has passed away for one reason or another. And so there's at least this like, okay, hold on, let me honor that, like let me give that person space. Now, I don't know how long that's lasting for people, right? I'm not going to pretend that, people are getting like 40 days to grieve, right? But
for everybody.
Yes. Meaning like that we all could use that time to grieve, like collectively, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, when I'm noticing number one, that recognition of like, oh wow, hold on, you're grieving. Let me like step back. Let me give you a little bit more time, I think, than other people would have before. And then yes, also I am concerned. I'm concerned about the collective grief. I'm concerned about like, and not so much that we're not going to grieve well. I'm concerned that we're kind of frozen, and that I don't know when the big grief is going to hit for everyone. And I'm concerned that it's like for everyone at the same time. Do you have any like thoughts about that?
Well, I think it'll come in waves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the first thing that we're going to see, and especially mental health professionals like yourself, are the medical people, the first responders, and the psychologists and therapists are going to break down. Right now, they're all stoically steel-spined on autopilot, just assembly lining, and there's going to come a point in time where they get to stop and say, whoa, this just happened to me and it's traumatic. And I don't even have time to process from one death to another, and they're all different, and they're all different ages, and they're all different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing some of that now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing some I'm seeing some articles coming out where there are some first responders who are saying, I'm dealing with these people and I'm getting ready to vent them, and they're saying, but I didn't believe this was real.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to, I'm not feeling it within my role as a psychologist, but I'm feeling it actually in my role as an educator. So I'm a professor, right, at a local community college, but I also am a faculty development coordinator. That just means that I put together trainings for our campus, right? And so in a lot of ways, I consider myself to be like the cheerleader, and just the person who kind of thinks through what's kind of support faculty members need. I've lost a few people, right? Some immediate, people and fur babies, right? So people and my dog. And then there's been a second layer of loss around me that has impacted me. And it's impacting my teaching, it's impacting my ability to follow through with everything. And so I think that although moving education to these online platforms is a good thing, we didn't think through that the teachers just kind of aren't going to have capacity, because like they're going to be grieving or they're just going to be tired, So yeah, I'm with you. And I hope that like those that are listening that have power and or energy, are able to create supportive measures or like supportive groups or whatever for all of the people that are providing the help and the assistance right now. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. What are some suggestions you have for anyone, like for anyone who's going through this grief process that's so, I feel like it's a big question, but that's so unique. I mean, I don't know if you want to detail like typical kind of grief process and typical responses to help somebody go through their grief and how that's different from now. That feels like a really big question.
Well, I think that it's helpful to understand where we are on the map, and that would require a basic understanding of grief and some of the ways that it might manifest itself. And I talk to a lot of people who just think they're losing it, they're going crazy, and you're not. Grief is a it's a multi-masked beast that can present itself in a variety of different ways. You might move through it in stages, but they're not going to be in any particular order. And you might move through a bunch of stages in the space of a traffic light. So everything from hearing your loved one talk to, all of those things that make people think like they're losing their mind it's very normal. One of the things that I have found the most helpful, though, especially with COVID, is to just remind people, if they can't be there when their beloved is dying, that the moment of death and those last moments of death, they neither define nor negate your entire relationship with that person. And it is okay. It is okay that you are unable to be there. There are no sacrificial altars here. You don't need to risk yourself to do this. We all understand anxiety and disappointment, but I just try to encourage people to not sink down into a feeling of having destroyed a relationship with someone or having that person angry at them in the afterlife, or because they didn't sacrifice everything to be there when the death occurred. And there are so many different things, that you can do on a spiritual level and over the phone and through technology that can help you get through this. And the key is to get through it. Grief doesn't have an on-off switch. It's progressive depending on the depth of the wound.
I have, two stories to connect to what you're saying. And so I'll share one and we'll see about where I get in the other one. But to the point of giving some permission and some allowance for not being there when somebody passes. So one of my most defining grief stories is that 11 years ago, both my father and my husband passed away a day apart from one another. So they were in different states. I couldn't be in both states at once. We knew what was going on. So given that I was married, right, I happily was with my husband and knew that if I had to make a choice, right, I had to honor that role. So, yeah, I was not there when when my dad passed away, and it wasn't until a year later that I then went back to the space where he was in hospice. And so I just, because I knew that it was coming, I made peace with it. And there were just different things that I did on the day of or as time was approaching, to still feel like I could honor that death. There's a little bit of pain, around like not being there. So I want to honor that like, just because we say it's okay doesn't mean that there's not like this sense of what I hoped for. Mm-hmm. But I had the gift of time. I had the gift of knowing what was coming. So I was able to say goodbye to him beforehand. And when we think about grief, whether it's sudden versus if you have time, makes a really big difference on how you're able to prepare for that grief.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So
absolutely. Even though, the preparation for it, is not, we talk about anticipatory grief, which is the anxiety and the secondary losses that we experience up until the actual death. And that's kind of a different, sort of grief than the actual grief from the loss. Mm-hmm. And I think that grief from loss, it's able to be managed better as time passes and you can absorb.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to that absorption part, the best way that I can describe my grief process is I felt like a steak that was trying to thaw out, and I have a lot of control issues with my emotions, and I wanted it to stay frozen for a really long time and for that thaw to be really slow and really controlled. And I did that probably for too long, to be honest. And so there were some, I don't want to say consequences. There were some things I had to deal with because that's the way that I chose to do it, So there's no right or wrong way. Mm-hmm. You've also brought up the use of technology, and I said I had a story to share there too, because although my husband was in a different state, we were not in our home state, and he had many friends and family in other states, right? So he passed away in a state we didn't live in because we were trying to get him some medical care. And actually, just because of my knowledge base, right, I knew that there were friends that were not going to be there, people in his life that he was really close to that were going to need to say goodbye to him. And I also wanted my husband to be able to hear it, although he was incapacitated, but, I feel that I know better, at least in my belief system, that my husband was able to hear it. Right. So I did. I got everyone on the phone individually and held the phone up to my husband's ear and told each friend, it's, he's going to go, like you need to say goodbye now if you want to do that. Otherwise, there's not going to be another way, as far as like when he's alive. And at least for me, that felt super important. I think for them, in fact, they've told me that was important too. So just trying to give an example to the story that you gave about the use of technology. I was just using cell phones to try to allow them to express what they needed to say so that their grief didn't get stuck. That was my main concern for them. What are some unique ways you're seeing individuals or family members negotiate the grief process, the goodbye process, the funeral process? I know that's some other work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've seen an awful lot of funerals, Zoom funerals, and I've officiated a couple, and live stream, Facebook Live funerals, and all sorts of interesting things. Which I'm so, gratified to see people stretching to make this happen and thinking about it. I had a family, the patriarch of the family was dying. The children were mostly adults, but there were grandchildren. And they wanted to have a Zoom meeting with him while he was in the hospital dying. And so the oldest daughter sent out to, like, there were 25 people involved with this, and she sent out his shirts to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they either wore them or they put them on a bed pillow kind of thing and held them. And the nurse was kind enough to use an iPad. And so he was able to see his family, holding his shirts and, wearing his shirts and singing to him and telling him that they loved him. And, it was so beautiful. And um, it's interesting because I'm a little bit torn about this, but I have seen similar things, not with the shirts, but the 25 people who all want to gather in the hospital room. And so maybe they're doing it 7, 8 people at a time because the nurses won't let anybody else in there. And it can be very, very anxious. It can cause a lot of anxiety for the person who's dying. I mean, think about it. Death is a lot like birth. And, you've got somebody that is laboring out of this world. So there's breathing patterns, there's fidgeting that goes on, there's a lot of self-awareness, that's happening. And these people don't always have time to engage with other people. But when you've got that many people in your hospital room, well, this fellow, he had that many people in his hospital room, but it was on a screen. And so he was just sighing and smiling, and it was just a lot easier on him. So I'm a little torn because I'm wondering, what monster have we created?
Sure. Well, and is this a better way, right? Are there, is it something to think through in the future of maybe instead of inundating it, it's both family and the individual that's passing, kind of like the immediate caregivers. And I'll say that from somebody who, kind of walked this walk. It's a lot. It's a lot to feel like you're tending to their health, your loved one's health, but then also tending to the individuals and knowing that they need to be there. They need to kind of say their goodbyes, but you're dead tired and you're afraid and you're all these things. So it is interesting to think of the ways that the frontiers of death and grief and loss are going to change even with this pandemic. I don't know if you noticed that I was actually welling up on the t-shirt example because I gave away a lot of my husband's t-shirts at the funeral. And the reason was because I had all his clothes with me, to kind of shorten it. We were traveling. We weren't home, so I had a lot of our things in the car, and it wasn't so much that I didn't want those things. It was like, what was I going to do with like 20 t-shirts, right? Like when there were more t-shirts at home, right? And so I gave them away at his funeral. So and
that's a beautiful gesture. I mean, at a time where people are needing to connect in a physical, tangible way, what better way than to have something that, they maybe remember him wearing, or it smells like him, or, that can be an incredible balm for the heart.
Yes. And that's exactly what it was for me, the smell, that's what I connected to the t-shirts, and hope that others did too. We have Maritza, again, one of our co-hosts, and somebody just listening in, sharing the account of when her father passed away, and then it was just she and her sister with him. And that, she can't imagine how it would be for a large family, because I love you used this quote that you also have on your website, and that I wholeheartedly believe, that, death is as sacred as birth, right? There is this, it really is like the deepest level of intimacy, right? Whether it's birth or death. And I told you this when I was sitting in your class, right? So many don't know this, but my dissertation was birth related. And so I have, that model in my head. And then as I listened to kind of aspects of death, I had this paper where I split it in half, and I had this list of parallels between birth and death, and the sacredness, the fact that we don't tell our birth and our death stories, in a way that I wish we did, really stands out to me. So I appreciate that. Can you share more about what you feel is so sacred about these two processes?
Well, we take a look at our human state, and it's, I like to say that death is not the opposite of life,
Mm-hmm.
birth is. And life is bookended by birth and death. So, we come into this human state, and, for the most part, it is treated somewhat sacredly, even though it's been over medicalized. But, we're spoken to softly, we're held, our needs are met, the blankets are softer, the temperature is geared to us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yet, when we die, a lot of people die alone and hooked up to machines and surrounded by strangers. And I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And because our death is our final rite of passage. So, we celebrate birthdays, we celebrate coming of age, we celebrate weddings, we celebrate retirements, and then we all act like we're not going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're missing it. We're missing our final rite of passage. And our final rite of passage, in my estimation, is the most intimate act we commit as a human being. When we exhale for that last time and we cease to be human, that's sacred space. It doesn't really matter, who or what you believe. Nobody gets out alive. It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, why can't we be present for it, for the people that are leaving? And why can't we consider what we want our own death to look like? And, most people say, well, I want to die in my sleep. And, that's great. But for the most part, that's not going to happen. That just is not, generally death is more of a gentle unraveling as we age and things start to break down and slow down and malfunction. And, it's not, it'll sometimes be a labor to the end.
And when you said people say that they want to die in their sleep, I mean, it really is, that's kind of like one of those soft versions of fear of death, right? Or anti-death culture. We don't really use that term, but I think it fits, right?
Death denial or death anxiety.
Yes, thank you. And of that, like, I just don't want to experience it, right? Or I want it to be peaceful, right? Of course, usually people are afraid of pain, right? But then when we think about if you're dying in your sleep, you're not going to be able to kind of be really present for the transition, and neither will your family, neither will your loved ones, right? And that transition and that opening can be so beautiful. Go ahead.
But if you think about it, what birthing woman isn't also kind of nervous?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is a form of birth. It's no matter what you believe, whether you believe that once that final exhale happens, nothing happens, or something happens, the fact is that you don't know because you've never done it before.
Sure. And yeah, it's certainly not to judge, but yeah, like I've been fortunate to be able to experience several people pass away in my life in many different ways, right? And so, yeah, that death anxiety as well, I saw a lot with my parents and my grandparents they just couldn't quite let go of being the parent or being the grandparent. And so even though like I was wanting to maybe support them, comfort them, or even like really directly deal with, hey, we know this is coming, there's some conversations we should have, right? Their death anxiety wouldn't allow them to kind of have some of those conversations. Yeah. And so there's just, there's no question there. It's just a moment that what you're describing is like reminding me of an experience that I had. Let's see. What else do we see with death anxiety? How do all of us kind of deal with, exhibit it in other ways in our daily life? And how is that changing now, if at all?
Well, here in the West, our whole world is built around death denial and death anxiety. We've got, I think the numbers are like $65 billion a year that we spend on creams and ointments and skin tighteners and surgery and to stop us from aging or looking like we're aging. And I think that society encourages us to be a death denying culture. We treat diseases past the point of productivity to where the treatment is worse than the illness. We hide death from our children. We don't talk about it openly. And I think the worst part for me is the extended treatments, where you've got somebody who at most has 6 months left to live. You're going to put them through chemo and radiation, which is going to make them sick, really sick and non-functional, in an effort to give them a few extra weeks. I think those are conversations that need to be made or that need to be had with the individual so that they know what their options are and what their choices are. You can have a situation where you've got someone that's very, very sick, but they want to stay around for their daughter's wedding in 3 months. And so you can do certain treatments with that, but they're cumulative. So, okay, we can get you 3 months, but after that, the medication that's going to allow you to go to your daughter's wedding isn't going to work anymore, and you're going to fade pretty fast. Or, we can go more slowly, or we've got other options. And I think that it's important for us to be able to make informed decisions about our own death. And we can't do that unless we know what the options are. And I have so many people who say to me, oh, I don't care. Do whatever you want with me, pull the plug, but you're really not doing anybody a service on that, because someone's going to have to make those decisions in the midst of their grief. They're going to have to make these giant decisions for you, when it would be just so simple for you to have a conversation and instead of leaving them guessing in their most vulnerable time, you actually give them a sense of how you think you might like this to go. Everything from your DNR to your burial or funeral body disposition processes.
Yeah. So DNR, do not resuscitate, right? For those who aren't familiar, you brought up also talking to children. How would you advise parents to talk to children, especially maybe younger children, about death? They're doing it anyway, right? Because we have to right now. But what are some recommendations you might have?
Well, I think as a society, we have to normalize death. And we can do that. I mean, we should be doing that with our children from the get-go. I think one of the things that sets us back is when we don't talk about it directly, and we sent Buffy to the farm, or Grandma went to sleep, that sort of thing. We can't continue that. It's causing some problems with younger children, especially psychologically, and it also creates a very dangerous paradigm, because children don't understand what death is, and they don't understand that if they point a gun at their friend and pull the trigger, that there's no reset button on that video game. So it is so important for us to incorporate death and normalize it in our society. And there's one of the students in one of my other classes, his name is Michael Sala, and he's out of Iowa. He has a list of books that are out. He's also a psychologist. That he's, and I think I can get you that list if you'd like to have it, but it's children's books specifically, and there's like 50 of them. Specifically how to talk to your child about death, how to explain it. And I used for a long time, there wasn't a whole lot out. And I used a book called Lifetimes, which essentially started with things like bugs and went to trees. And, everything has a life cycle. Everything dies.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to understand that people do too. And it's just, we cannot continue to hide this behind the curtain from our children. And the reason we're doing it is because it was done to us.
Yes, yes. And like you said, and because of the death denial and the death anxiety, right? Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts floating around, but typically people in the audience end up finding things before we do. So if somebody is Googling right now and you want to throw in Michael Sala's work in the comments, that'll be much appreciated. But if not, Angie, yes, you can give it to me and I'll make sure that we include it. Diana Baker Collins is in here as well. She was actually on the show last week saying, yeah, that we all need to understand our mortality. And yes, everyone has a life cycle and everything. I mean, that's one of the things as I kind of work with the collective. So we actually host, that's one of the things that we've done is hosting virtual circles around topics for grief and loss. In fact, we have one coming up here soon. For us, that's more of support, that's more of kind of preventative, right? And building community, even though we can't do it in person, and just being there for one another, because a lot of us, right, are struggling in a variety of ways. Also, kind of taking that more, it tends to be more of mothers, parents, kind of, women in the community, but we like to say that we operate at the pace of our children. And so our kids are also around seeing that. And we know that we are modeling for them what it is to just fully experience our emotions, root that in our traditions, right? And then showing them that like it's okay, right? We can face this gracefully and kind of with the help and support of others.
Yeah, it's okay to be sad.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to derail your life. It's interesting. You made a point there, and I wanted to say, Irving Yalom is an existential psychologist, and one of the things that he has said is that death anxiety is the mother of all religion, and the idea that we need to be able to believe that something or someone is going to save us. But especially here in the Western culture, we just cannot accept that this is going to end, and it causes us to do a lot of take extraordinary measures to deny and prevent and not talk about. So I think that it's important for us to understand that we find comfort in our spiritual and religious traditions, and we embrace those, but they don't forgive us. They're not a get out of death free card. And
yes, they certainly don't absolve us of the emotion, right? And of needing to process the emotion if you're the person who's survived a loved one who's passed, and they certainly don't get us out of our own mortality. There's so much that I could say about that. I'll say one thing, and then I want to make sure we get to your book. I think my walk with like my most profound grief, one of the things that it certainly taught me about was like that existential aloneness, right? So within existential theory is this idea of like, we're ultimately alone, I have a ton of people in my life that I love and that love me. So I'm never lonely, but that true feeling of we're alone. We go alone, we come in alone. I really got to experience that. And it's something that impacts the way that I live my life now as well. So.
Yeah.
Let's, there's not a smooth segue here, but I want to hear about your book and what you're writing. And I'm guessing that it's on topic, so it's probably not that big of a story.
Yeah, well, I wish I had more to tell you, but it's in process. Mm-hmm. And it will be about the basics of death midwifery, but also death and dying. And then it kind of incorporates my sort of spirituality and spiritual path too, which I don't do in the training, because, you know, everybody dies. And if you're going to be a death midwife, you need to be able to hold space, and be with this person where they are and meet them where they are, and be able to embrace them, and their own belief systems, and not overlay or insert your own. But, you know, there are also situations where I'm dealing with someone from my own spiritual community. And I am allowed, and because I'm a minister, I am able to interject that. And I think that, you know, part of this book will sort of work with that. And it goes a little bit more deeply into the other thing that people don't like to talk about, which is, interacting with things that exist outside of time, space, and the five senses. What do you see in the death threshold? Who do you meet? You know, who is grandma talking to, in the corner that you can't see? And, you know, and how can we not turn that into an argument? You know, when Aunt Carol shows up in that stupid pink twin set and wants a cup of tea, I'm going to go get her a cup of tea. But I can't see her, you know, but there's a conversation going on here. And just because it's not my reality doesn't mean it's not real. So
100%. Yeah.
So I kind of unpack that a little bit, and I talk about the archetype of the psychopomp, who is the walker between the worlds, the escort of death, and who, you know, what that might present itself like, what it's presented itself as over the course of millennial, thousands and thousands of years in Greek mythology and Roman mythology and Egyptian mythology, and how that sort of character has, you know, slid into a space through across all those cultures. And it's worldwide. It's not just Europe. It's Asia. It's, you know, it's everywhere. So so the book talks about that a bit too.
So I've heard the term through you and also through people who have gone through, right, your trainings for a psychopomp. Can we think about that like a medium? And I think as a medium is a more common word, or are those separate gifts and talents?
It's a little different. In fact, it's a lot different. The psychopomp is the escort. They're not there to bring you messages from the dead. They're there to escort the dead to wherever they're going. So it's, you know, it's Anubis from the Egyptians. It's Hermes. It's Hecate. It's there are these, again, archetypes all through mythology that show up when someone is dying, and sometimes it's Aunt Carol in the pink twin set. So it can be a lot of different entities, and for those people who are very empathic, or who understand how to sort of transcend momentarily time, space, and the five senses, those are human psychopomps. And a lot of folks that take my death midwife training, that's what they are, and they don't know because they've never heard the concept before. But you know how it is when there's 45 people and you standing at the bus stop, and that perfect stranger is going to be the one coming up to you and telling you that his mom just died. And you know, that's a gift, and it's like a beacon.
It is. You know, I want to get into, and we're going in this beautiful circle of where we're ending back up where we started, you know? And so I'm thinking about, I won't share this just yet, but I'm thinking about what brought me to this work. And so I want to ask you, like, as a final question, how did you start? How did you even begin with death midwifery?
Oh, well, I think that First of all, a lot of people think that, we leave a lot of people thinking, and I'm glad I have an opportunity to dispel this, that you have to be trained to do death midwifery. Well, whatever you do, having a great set of tools is not a detriment, but you don't have to have training to do this. And so I started in this in the 1980s. I was working for the Federal Correctional Institution prison system during the AIDS epidemic. In fact, AIDS had just gotten its name. And nobody was sure, kind of like COVID, no one was sure how it was really transmitted. They thought maybe mosquitoes. I mean, it was pretty vague. But there were people in the prison system, especially, first of all, the facility that I worked for was a co-ed medical facility. So I was working both ends, bookends. A lot of the women that were there because they were pregnant. So I saw a lot of births. And then I had this whole AIDS ward thing going on. So I saw a lot of deaths too. And I saw an awful lot of people who didn't want to be there. Other guards who didn't want to be there. But I felt drawn to it because I thought, this person, it doesn't matter what they've done. They're human and they're going to not be human and they're suffering. And, if nothing else, I can just sit with them. And, that's kind of what a death midwife does.
Yeah.
So that was where it started. And then I moved into working with a local police department. And it seemed like every time somebody was, in a fatality for a car accident, I ended up getting that call. And then my colleagues would come and say, hey, my dad's dying. My kid's got leukemia. Can you help? Well, you kind of learn the way to go through that. And some of it is just very intuitive. And some of it is just tools and skills you pick up along the way. I'm very grateful for the nurses that, showed me how to do different things. And in both I think that birth and death happen in the same threshold. That's my personal opinion. And so, it's a really busy place. But, I felt really equipped to kind of handle myself in that threshold. And then in the 20 teens, just before the 20 teens, I met my teacher, Nora Cedarwind Young, and then was trained by her and then started, I was like on fire. It was like, everybody needs to take this class. And so I was promoting her in the Chicago area, and she was from Washington State. And I trained with her. I probably attended her class about 6 or 7 times. And then she called me and said, please come to Washington. I've been given 10 days to live. So I went, and she said, I need you to carry on this work. That's how it happened.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think this, it's so profound. It feels so expansive. And like, it definitely feels like you were at the appropriate, is a soft word, like appropriate places at the right time, but it feels really ordained. You're at the destined places at the right time. And I think that's really important too for people who, one of the things that we might be grieving during this time period is like jobs or our roles or our careers. And so what it looks like, although I'm sure you didn't experience it like the most graceful thing, right? What it looks like to walk through life, knowing that like as we go through like that meandering, we're going to get there and all these experiences are going to connect, right? If we're flexible, if we allow for those connections to take place, especially when we're birthing something new, and not that death midwifery, something new that you birthed, right? But when we're birthing something new because it's new for us.
That's a new cultural dynamic. And it takes some getting used to. A lot of people still feel like death is just morbid and gross and, something that they should avoid and let the professionals take care of. And that's an indoctrination.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I'll end with one story to kind of round this out, but a brief one. When I read an article, and an article was actually shared with me, various people, somebody in my collective, a very dear friend, and I think I saw something, via social media, and it was all about what a death midwife was. And so I shared it with one of my aunts, and when I shared it with her, she was like, "Don't you already do that?" And so, with that. Yeah, in my culture, in my family, she was just like, "We already do that. You don't need a certificate." And I didn't feel that I needed it, right, per se. Like we're back to where you started. There were reasons why I wanted the certificate for the sake of my collective, so that we could, say, "Hey, yeah, we can do this," right, with a little rubber stamp. But there's so much history and lineage and our abilities to cope with and deal with death. And we have stories that, like, until we have the conversation, we don't realize that we have a way of coping, and we have a lot of practices already around this transition, what is just another transition. So,
and just if I could, just real quick, the idea that, first of all, death doesn't always happen on pretty clean white sheets. Sometimes it happens in the middle of a street. And, you know how to comport yourself there. But the other thing is understanding what the training gives you is the opportunity to understand how to deal with people, especially underserved communities, poverty-stricken communities, minority communities. You can totally expand the horizon to incorporate all of that, because now you have all of the information that you need to be able to speak with the professionals to make sure that this person is getting a decent price for the services that they're requiring, and giving them options as to what they can do, even if they have no money, and also making sure that they are met where they are, trans folk, gay people whose parents don't approve of their partner, or actually anybody, or interfaith people. It's all different.
I want to appreciate you for being a woke white woman. And so that's, I know that because of your class. I know that because of your presence on social media and the ways that you own your privilege, and then also speak to and try to amplify the voices of others. So I just thank you for that specifically, but certainly thank you holistically, right, for just this beautiful space that you hold, and just your life's work.
I love it. You have to love it to be able to
absolutely
do this work. You have to be able to walk through life with compassion and a wide angle lens.
For sure. Well, I want to encourage all of our audience, right, to use this weekend, right? Use this weekend when you're around your friends and family, when you've been having these conversations about missing people, to start to broach the conversations around grief and loss and what ifs and what would we do, or if not, what are some of the stories, right? How did we deal with grief and loss before? How did my grandparents or other people deal with grief and loss, or what happened in the story? Start to have these conversations, right? Start to journal, start to take some time, right, to write down your thoughts. If this is pulling anything up for you, which it probably is, talk to someone, or write some things down. I also want to acknowledge there's several people here in the chats that are saying hello, and you may know some of them. Angie, so Patricia, can you see the names or no?
I can't.
All right, so Patricia, Bellatine, I think it's Tanya from a class, Tanya Barra. Those are Gabby Mitchell. You watch us frequently on other shows. Anyway, and then the other people I've said hi to. Dorian, one of my friends, is always here too. So thank you everyone for watching. Have a lovely weekend. Get some rest as well, and have those conversations. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye. Good night.